guys, welcome back to Before You Die, a series based around not only reviewing games, but diving into them on a deeper level. Because lots of games have good gameplay, audio, storytelling, and characters, but not all games have soul. So today, we're here to answer one simple question. Should you play Hades 2 before you die?
Yourself.
There's no better place to start with a game like Hades than what you can see and what you can hear.
So persistent. Give up already, witch.
From the second you open your main menu screen, it's immediately apparent that this title is something special. Art and animations are fluid and seamless, designs are eye-catching, and the art direction is always captivating. With so many moments throughout my playthrough where I had to just sit back and be at awe of what was on screen, even in a game with a pseudo-isometric perspective. Everything on offer here just feels high quality and masterful, where each element of the game obviously has been given hours and hours of attention, and after playing for just a little while, it's so clear that Hades 2 was in early access for almost a year because each system is so meticulously fine-tuned. For example, I struggle to even think of a single voice actor in this game that didn't knock it out of the park. Between Malinois's heartfelt and sincere delivery to more comedic moments with, say, Dora back at home transitioning between scary and fun sidekick. The inflection and range from each character you meet is astounding, and they all feel genuine and like real people throughout, which is only exacerbated by the fact that during the story, you will be giving each of them presents that not only progress their own tales, but make you grow closer with them. It makes those slower moments between combat where you are just talking a real treat, and I think in a game like this, none of it would work without this level of detail. On top of this too, other key things like animations both in and out of combat are really solid. I mean seriously, just look at the transition to quit from the game to the main menu. Things like this seem small at first, but they all add up into one immaculate presentation. It's funny because I remember when Starfield was coming out, there was a big controversy online about how the main menu screen seemed lazy and uninspired. And at the time, I thought it was ridiculous to complain and assume things about an entire game just because of its main menu. But lo and behold, Starfield, just like its main menu, sucked, at least for me. And the uninspired music and presentation as the first thing you saw when you loaded up the game carried over to everything else. Hades 2, by comparison, only further proves this point, but in the opposite direction. From the second you open up this game and click play, the music and animations are just right. And really, that's why I wanted to start this Before You Die here, on the presentation of it all. Because Hades 2 is a masterclass in not only a lack of bugs or game-breaking issues on release, but also professionalism and giving consumers a fully finished and cared-for product from the perspective of, well, everything. Another perfect example of this to illustrate my point even further comes right at the start of the game, where after a couple of deaths, you run into Artemis, the god of the hunt, sitting on a statue near your camp by the river. When you approach her, she asks you to lend her her voice, and if you do, you are met with this moment.
That's it.
Things like this are what so many other games lack. I know it's just a single fleeting moment, but it's one where everything comes together into a beautiful crescendo. The soothing voices of Malinois and Artemis combining into one, the faint sounds of the water colliding with the rocks nearby, or the shimmer of nature and butterflies that move around in this colorful environment. And that's not even to mention the really provoking art design in every direction you look around in the image. Moments of consequence like these are all over Hades 2, and it proves that with enough love and care, games can be true art, storytelling devices that capture not just hearts and minds, but souls too. And when speaking of soul, Hades 2 is practically overflowing with it. But you see, just because a game looks pretty and sounds good doesn't mean it's actually fun to play. But on that front, I also have some great news too. The core gameplay loop of Hades 2 centers around something quite similar to the first. Melenoi, daughter of Hades and Persephone, and brother of Zagreus, the main character of Hades 1, has been trained from birth under the watchful eye of Hecate. As a child, Melenoi was given to this great witch as a form of protection due to Kronos, the Titan of Time, launching an all-out war on Olympus to establish a new golden age for mortals at the expense of gods. There's a lot more to say about this story and its themes, but I'll save that for later in this video. For now, we need to talk about something more simple, but equally as important, the actual loop. You see, Hades 2 is a roguelike game, which for those of you who don't know, means you'll essentially be doing the same thing over and over again in order to reach a goal, going down a similar path each night while slowly upgrading your character and abilities, trying to find new builds to get further into the story. It's a style that many games nowadays try to pull off. Hell, even my first Before You Die review for the newest God of War games included Valhalla, which is a roguelike spin-off DLC for the series. But Hades, far and away in both its original incarnation and this newest one, is the gold standard for what roguelikes can be. And that all starts with the loop we go into every night and the rich gameplay surrounding it. Whether you decide to tackle the underworld or Mount Olympus itself each night, both being a different route you unlock in the story and must go through multiple times to win, they each provide 4 bosses in total and a whole host of different environments and rooms as a challenge. In most encounters you step into, a variety of enemies based in that location begin to attack you, and it's your job to destroy them all while taking as little damage over and over again, each time getting a small reward for your efforts that slowly makes Melenoi stronger and stronger. In one run, you may find a lot of boons or upgrades from, say, Zeus that allow you to fire off chain lightning with each hit that can stun enemies in place, while in another you may mix and match a bunch of different boons that turn Melenoi into a god that can run around the battlefield at blazing speeds, smashing into things and causing explosions. There are so many different ways to play this game, and they all feel great. For example, look at this run I had early on where I upgraded my cast with a freeze ability, which not only would hold enemies in place, but could slow projectiles to a crawl, making dodging a breeze. My whole build this time around centered on the idea of keeping myself in a corner while dodging any incoming fire and attacking enemies while they recharged. But on subsequent runs, I was doing the exact opposite, using a massive axe to jump headfirst into battle and do big damage with each swing. The difference in gameplay from one run to the next can vary drastically, and that all comes down to how these systems and gameplay interact with one another. First of all, before any run to Olympus or the underworld, you were given a choice of 6 different weapons to choose from, each with 3 distinct playstyles to unlock, meaning you essentially have 18 different ways to play in total, ranging from becoming a fast-moving ninja that moves in and out of danger, to a ranged spellcaster that hugs the edge of the battlefield. Each and every one of these weapons feels not only unique, but well designed, offering immense power if you master them, and a lack of punch if you don't know what you're doing. For me personally, I found the most success with the Umbral Flames, as they allowed me to just hold down the attack button while moving away from enemies at the same time, making dodging while doing damage second nature, despite it being hard to get the build going at first. But on top of this too, there are a whole host of upgrades you can give your character inside and outside of runs as well. For example, by gifting all of the NPCs in-game you find presents, usually being Nectar of the Gods, they will in turn reward you with keepsakes, which are trinkets you can use between each boss and runs that provide awesome benefits. Many of these, for instance, will enhance the abilities of any one Olympian, giving you rarer boons and making them appear more often, while others completely change how you play by mixing damage types or providing more money and resources to mess around with. Furthermore, by collecting an asset known as Grasp in runs, you can level up your Arcana points, which are a resource used to turn Arcana cards on and off, each of which unlock extremely powerful abilities like naturally regenerating mana or stronger boon rarity chances in-game. So based on your current number of Arcana points you've gotten from spending Grasp, you can slot cards of different expense values into your board and craft the exact type of playstyle you want to go for based on your weapon and keepsake choices in tandem. So in other words, before any run in Hades 2 even begins, you will be making a variety of decisions on what you want to bring and how you're going to play. And that's not even to mention that during runs too, between bosses, you will be swapping out keepsakes or gaining and losing Arcana cards, boons, and abilities as your run progresses. It's a really deep and intricate system that allows for a myriad of strategies to take fold. Early on, I consistently was changing out my loadout and figuring out what I liked best or what worked well for certain bosses. It was really fun, especially in that initial experimentation phase. And what adds to that excitement even more so are the fantastic progression systems in Hades 2. During each run to the Underworld or Olympus, you will be gathering tons and tons of materials, from seeds to plant in the garden, to flowers to use in cauldron recipes that add new things you can use in runs to increase your power, like for example, extra health fountains. So each time you arrive back home after being defeated or beating a final boss in a zone, you end up spending a good amount of time just upgrading everything back at your base. Most importantly of all, your relationships with NPCs. Now, I'm not going to go as far as saying Hades 2 is a dating simulator, but with all of the conversations and things NPCs have to say each time you return home, it may as well have been one. And don't even get me started on those sauna scenes. It's honestly astounding just how much well-written dialogue there really is on offer here, and it adds yet another carrot on that stick that makes you want to do well, that way you can brag to your friends and enemies back home about it after battle. Throughout my over 40 hours playing this game, I literally had dozens of lines of unique dialogue from multiple characters every single time I got home, and it's bewildering even thinking about how much work this must have taken the dev team. And as if the loop couldn't get any more addictive, there are some fantastically designed bosses here as well. Whether it's the Underworld or Olympus you're targeting, the in total 8 main bosses and handful of other side ones each at first present a pretty fair challenge, but over time can be studied and learned until they almost feel trivial. The first time I went up against Typhon, for example, I had no idea what I was doing and got absolutely whopped. But after fighting him over and over again and learning his attacks one by one, by the end I was able to go up against him with almost no problem since I knew exactly what he would be throwing at me each time. Essentially, Hades 2 offers progression from not just boons, weapons, keepsakes, and Arcana cards that keep getting stronger, but from a knowledge and deeper understanding of the game and its mechanics that make victory so rewarding by the end. Now, that's not to say that the loop doesn't fall into a more stale formula in the very late game though, because after you've fully maxed out some of your weapons and keepsakes and have an Arcana build that you like, it's hard to not just keep using the same strategy over and over again for cheap victories. I actually would have preferred if there were more mechanics in game that forced you to play differently. For example, maybe an enemy that could steal your keepsakes per run to make it impossible to use the same strategy, or specific bosses that would alter their playstyle or how many times they died previously. Now, there is a difficulty modifier in Hades 2 called Oath of the Unseen that allows you to gain extra resources by increasing enemy damage, speed, or abilities, but it didn't quite add the level of depth I was looking for here, to be honest. Increasing enemy health and damage or adding a time limit for each boss, for example, makes the game harder, I guess, but it's not actually in an interesting way. It's still at the end of the day the exact same loop as before, just a little more tedious. How much better would it have been if, for example, after killing Polyphemus, a giant in the Olympus route for the first time, when we go back another time, this time he would have a club and is extremely angry, using this new weapon with a whole host of new abilities you must learn. A great example of how to do something like this right is Prey Mooncrash, another roguelike title and also the most underrated and greatest DLC for a game of all time. I'm begging you guys, please check it out. Runs in that title often will change dramatically. For example, I had one where all the power was cut out in the space station, so my usual builds that required electricity or going through certain doors just didn't work at all, and I had to come up with new strategies on the fly. To me, this combination of immersive sim elements into roguelike games is the next evolution of the genre. And Hades 2 would have been very well served with more systems like this that changed things up dramatically mid-run and provided an actually interesting challenge, not just enemies with more health and higher damage. But regardless, the overall loop on offer here still is fantastic, and for the most part, the game feels great, giving you a lot of variety, especially early on in gameplay, that makes finding your style really fun. And truthfully, trying to master all the different weapons and playstyles for all the dialogue unlocks is addictive, and there's no denying that. In fact, if I had one big other complaint about this overall loop outside of needing a dash of immersive sim elements, it would actually be that Hades 2 doesn't do much different than Hades 1. In a lot of ways, it's just more of the same, but maybe slightly better. For a lot of people, that's exactly what they wanted. After all, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But for me personally, I usually like more risk-heavy sequels that aren't afraid to try changes outside the box. In the case of Hades 2, it sticks to its foundations and principles like a puppy who just found its owner. And while I think a little more experimentation would have been very welcome, the product that we did get is great, and if you like Hades, you'll love Hades 2. However, none of this loop could actually work in the first place if it weren't for what I like to call the secret sauce of Hades 2.
What happened to you, man? You're so small. Not that you're usually big.
You got so close to beating me last time, babe.
Did you shrink down or something?
If you've been watching my channel now for any amount of time, you'll know that one thing I always love in games that I think makes them vastly better is radical realization. It's the idea that games as a medium, because of their ability to give agency, should radically realize each and everything that a player does as much as possible. Or in other words, consequences for actions. For example, in Baldur's Gate 3, probably the primary reason that title blew up so much was all of the clips of crazy things you could do in game and how the world would react to you. Playing as a drow? Well, now the goblins in camp are scared of you. Playing as a Githyanki? Going to the creche completely changes as you're seen as one of the group. Playing as a bear? Oh no. Things like this take games from just a fun adventure to truly immersive and provoking experiences. And in the case of Hades 2, while there is no transforming into spiders or killing goblins, there is a lot of emergent dialogue. Even over 40 hours into my playthrough, each and every run either through the Underworld or Olympus ended in and included dozens to hundreds of lines of dialogue from almost all the characters back home and those in between. If you die to specific bosses in certain ways, characters remark on that, and the bosses themselves might even poke and prod you about the last time when you finally return. A prime example of this is Eris, the second main boss of the Olympus route, who is purposely written as an annoying brat whose every waking moment is meant to be the bane of your existence. Upon first meeting her, because I didn't know her moveset, I was swiftly taken out and I had to go back to camp and be made fun of. And when I returned to fight her again in her boss arena, she had this to say to me.
Look who! You got so close to beating me last time, babe. I could feel my wings growing heavy, like the underworld was calling me home. But I'm totally fine now.
The game not only recognizes my earlier defeat, but reconstructed the entire game's narrative around it. If I had beaten Eris the first go-around, this dialogue would have never appeared and instead would be much different. And in my case, when I finally got around to meeting her again in battle and finally besting her, when I got back to camp this time and went to talk to her, I got this exchange.
Hey, if I were you, well, come to think of it, I'd do a lot of things. Go for a jog. That seems nice. Having legs. Getting the heart rate going. A heart seems nice.
Hades 2 radically realizes each and everything you do. Whether that's losing to or triumphing over a boss and remarking on it, or even NPCs commenting on what weapon you're using and how, the game constantly reminds you not only of the main story, but your role in it. And I cannot overstate just how impactful things like this in games are. It makes the story feel like your own, where you know the actions you make in this world will genuinely change how your playthrough goes. At one point in the story, I even remember I was going to Olympus a lot after discovering the new route, and when I finally decided to make my way back to the underworld to farm for some materials, I met with an old friend named Arachne who wasn't too happy about me abandoning the place.
You may know all about the gods, more than I.
But it seems you have a thing or two to learn still when it comes to friendship. Even a little old spider knows that.
Seeing that my absence had a genuine effect on the characters made me take a step back and not only wonder what would have happened if I had played things differently, but also made me question how I should play going forward to be kind to all the characters I liked. In most other games, the decision of which route to take, for example, would only come down to strictly business. What materials do I need? What story am I trying to unlock? Etc., etc. But in Hades 2, because you know each decision you make has genuine consequences, it makes those decisions so much more thought-provoking. Should I go to Olympus for that sweet new gear? Or is it probably time I go check back up on Arachne? After all, she is so nice and I don't want her to complain again. Interactions like this elevate a roguelike game like Hades 2 from just mindless fun to genuinely engaging and thought-provoking journeys. This radical realization, the secret sauce of Hades 2, is maybe what I found most enjoyable about it overall. There were so many moments in just my first playthrough of ways in which the game truly understood how I was playing and reacted realistically to it. Like the time I used Athena's Gorgon amulet in the underworld and called her to the depths, after which she immediately remarked on being here for the first time. Or what about one time when I got a power-up during a run that transformed me into a miniature version of myself, and I felt like every single character after that had a hilarious or worried remark about my new appearance.
What happened to you, Mary? You're so small. Not that you're usually big. I mean, you've always been just right, but normally you're... Just forget I spoke.
Hey, you look, did you shrink down or something? Or did I grow bigger all of a sudden? Or, my head?
You're so tiny right now, babe. How cute. Old Cersei must have done that to you, yeah?
By my estimation, this is the primary catalyst for what makes Hades 2 a great game. And frankly, it's what made Hades 1 so awesome too. But here in the second installment, the depth of reactions and number of them is just taken to a slightly higher level. It's proof once again that sometimes making the best games means simply reacting to everything players do. It heightens the stories in ways only games could, and shows why this medium as an art form can be so special. I don't think Hades 2 would work nearly as well if it weren't for all of the effort put into this system of characters and how they radically realize you. Spitting out dialogue based on a priority system that tells characters what to say based on the most important things you accomplished last run. I wish more games, not just roguelikes, would take some of these learnings from Hades and apply it to their own stories as well, because it makes even what would have otherwise been mundane moments really impactful and interesting, since you know you have so much agency to affect how they play out, and just by knowing you have that power, everything becomes better. And just like in Baldur's Gate 3, which I mentioned before, the dialogue and presentation of all of these combinations and permutations in Hades 2 of how the story can play out are all done at an absolutely excellent level of quality, making the game feel that much more polished and meaningful. But you see, just because Hades 2 does have so much emergent storytelling doesn't mean it lacks the more traditional style either. Because throughout every run of Hades 2, through each bit of dialogue you hear and upgrade you get, there is a main goal and main story. And on this front, I have a lot of thoughts on it.
Right. Off we go.
Well, goody.
To start, I want to stress that for the most part, the story of Hades 2 is engaging. The entire beginning of the game is exciting, and discovering more NPCs on each run while slowly uncovering the mythos of Kratos and what's going on is a fun journey. And to give you some background, essentially, many years ago, the Titan of Time, Kronos, after an eternity being imprisoned by the gods, finally enacts his revenge and starts an all-out war in order to bring about a new, so-called Golden Age. The previous Golden Age was seen as the age of mortals at the expense of gods, and Kronos wants to bring it back. During this escapade, he imprisoned Melinoe's entire family, that being her father Hades, mother Persephone, and brother and main character of the first game, Zagreus. Left alone as a child in the care of the great witch Hecate, a friend of the family, she is trained from birth to become a skilled killer with the ability to take on Kronos and his legions of warriors and gods like Prometheus, who you fight in the Olympus route. This eventually leads to the events in which we play in game, where night after night you venture forth either into the underworld or Olympus itself to fight back against Kronos. In the underworld, each night you can kill Kronos but never stop him, as he will just come back again as if nothing happened through his mastery of time. And it's only by discovering a mirror to the subconscious in his bedchambers that you can contact Zagreus in a timeline from the past and work out a way to kill Kronos before he ever even becomes a problem using a weapon of great power. To craft this weapon, you must gather materials in both the underworld and Olympus, where Kronos has unleashed Typhon, a monstrous titan that aims to swallow the world. After numerous runs through each zone or through the trials of chaos, Malinoi and her crew at home base eventually unlock the ability to finally kill Kronos for good by crafting this grand weapon and giving it to Zagreus in the past, who then promises to kill Kronos before he ever becomes the villain in the present. It's a satisfying story overall, albeit with somewhat confusing plot points and no really exceptional explanations as to how it all works. But regardless, up to this point, the story flow and main narrative is engaging enough. However, it's right at the end, in the very final moments of the story of Hades 2, that sadly, so many things fall apart. After giving Zagreus the weapon and then returning to the present time frame, you quickly discover that somehow Kronos is still alive. It's revealed that in the past, instead of killing Kronos as promised, Zagreus instead spared him and implanted into his mind the memories of what could have been. An alternative timeline where Grandpa Kronos actually treated his family well, including a small playable moment where you get to walk around as Kronos while playing with your granddaughter Malinoi as a child like any good grandpa should. In but an instant, the cold-hearted and calculated villain that was Kronos disappears, and in his place is an entirely new man, this time sorry for the atrocities he has committed and fearful of sin. He apologizes to Malinoi in our current time period and helps her to unshackle her family currently stuck in time, after which they come back and rejoice one another, only to decide right at the end that Kronos may be spared and can live happily ever after with his family. First of all, the abruptness of this all really took me aback on my first playthrough. It's just plain weird to be fighting against this villain for over 40 hours, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, within a 5-minute cutscene, everything's just alright. On a conceptual level, I get it, and even more so, I understand the lesson trying to be taught here, that being that even the most evil amongst us can be saved, and that circumstance is what creates monsters. It's a similar idea to the first Hades game, but not only is it not pulled off as well here, but it just plain comes out of left field and doesn't feel earned. I actually would have loved a story like this, one about redemption of pure evil, if more time had been allotted to, for example, slowly unraveling the past of Kronos by going into his past through Zagreus multiple times to try and change who he is. Like, imagine if halfway through the game, we discover an entirely new third zone to fight in. This time in the past as Zagreus, and through each run of this new time, you would unravel lore about Kronos, and every time you meet him in the end, use reasoning and psychology to change the man he will become in the future. Essentially, that's actually what ended up happening, but we don't get to see any of it for the most part, and instead are left with a story that out of nowhere ends and simply says, "Trust me bro, after seeing his family happy, he changed." Once again, that's a good story and lesson to take away in theory, but the execution was just so lacking. And that's not even to mention the astounding number of narrative threads that were so interesting earlier in the story and just completely fall flat or disappear with no payoff. For example, far and away the biggest offender in all of this is the idea of that next golden age. As I mentioned before, in Greek mythology, Kronos led a time for mortals known as the Golden Age, where the gods' power waned and humans lived prosperously. Throughout Hades 2, it's implied that not only is Kronos going to bring about another Golden Age like this, but that maybe the gods deserve it. There are multiple moments with NPCs throughout the game that seem to hint at the fact that the gods have been treating mortals horribly. And when you see things like, for example, the god of foresight, Prometheus, who once gave the mortals fire, siding with Kronos, it makes you start to wonder if you actually are fighting on the side of good. After all, you have to remember, as Malinoi, daughter of Hades, you essentially are fighting the whole game to unleash the king of the underworld and unshackle the maniacal gods like Zeus and Ares from their fight up top. For a good portion of my initial playthrough, I genuinely thought the story was going to have some big twist where it was revealed that we were the bad guys all along and that Kronos was fighting to save humanity while we were fighting to save the evil gods, all in a big ending where we would have to make a decision to do what Millennium would or do what we would do in the real world. A fascinating kind of fourth wall break. But instead, as we know, the game just ends. Kronos becomes a good guy out of nowhere, the family gets back together, and literally no mention of the Golden Age in the slightest. What even happened to that narrative thread? Why were there so many dialogue points with NPCs that hinted at a deeper story here, only for nothing to happen? It almost feels like the writers for Hades 2 had a bunch of initial ideas on where to take this story and just weren't able to pull it off in the end, or ran out of time and said, screw it, Deus Ex Machina, Kronos is a good guy now, the end. Another example of this would be Hecate herself as well. During the epilogue, where you can essentially play the game over and over again in order to stop the threads of time where Kronos' evil is still happening, if you grow your bond even more with the witch, she reveals a huge lore point to you. Hecate is actually Millennium from an alternative timeline, one where Kronos and his evil ended up succeeding, and she was the only person left to fight. Hecate, or Millennium in this timeline, grew angry and hateful and learned to control the power of the fates themselves, gaining the ability to transport back in time into a new timeline where she could find herself as a child and train her alternative self to succeed where she previously failed. This is a fascinating reveal so late, and something that drastically changes the meaning and perception of not only Hecate, but Millennium herself. I feel like something like this could have played a much bigger role and had a huge impact on the storytelling, but yet again, it didn't at all, essentially instead being regulated to nothing more than a side chat with one of the characters. A fun little Easter egg at best. And all of this just comes together to form a truly messy ending to a story that could have been so much more. Because at the end of the day, I really did love a lot of the narrative as well. The introduction to so many awesome Greek mythological figures like Polyphemus, the shepherd Cyclops, who was talked about in Homer's famous Odyssey, where Odysseus, another character we get to talk to in-game, blinded the beast to escape from a cave. Seeing these mythological figures come to life on screen is amazing, and you can tell the studio really loves this Greco-Roman time period in history and gives it the attention and care it deserves. Other things were awesome too, like most of the lead-ups to the ending where so many narrative threads were being nurtured, hinting at a huge crescendo before falling apart right at the finish line. And even the pacing for the majority of the game, one of the hardest things to pull off in any title, is actually pretty good. The mix of storytelling and humor with characters intertwined with fast-paced and adrenaline-pumping combat never really grew stale, and for the most part, after fighting, I was always excited to talk, and after talking, I was excited to fight. Or in other words, everything right up until the ending felt pretty great and was a joy, and then the ending happens and it just pulls the rug out from under the whole ensemble. I just really wish this final act could have been cleaned up a little more before release and those side stories and themes focused on more. Because in theory, there is a meaningful lesson here about family and the bonds we form, about how the winds of time can change who we are as people, and most importantly, how there's always room for redemption even in those who cause so much pain. Because usually, those who cause the most pain have also been on the receiving end quite a bit. There are themes on offer here that truly speak to me and many of you as well, I'm sure, but they are all wrapped up in a messy narrative that fails to capitalize on the setup. Even the idea of time loops nowadays is kind of tried and tired, but in a roguelike like this about the Titan of Time, I think it could have been well suited, but only if it was actually pulled off well. Instead, it's messy, confusing, and just leaving a lot of room to be desired. So all in all, for everything that Hades 2 does so amazingly well, its main narrative falls flat right at the very end. And it's a shame because it could have made this one of the most enjoyable games out there otherwise. But now we need to answer the question you were all here for in the first place. Should you play Hades 2 before you die? Well, despite the flaws, without a doubt, definitely. It's a style of game that so many other studios are fond of nowadays, that being roguelikes. But in many ways, it feels like a perfection of what this genre is now. Hosting a captivating world, amazing characters and voice acting, and a setting that radically reacts to everything you do, making it feel so much more meaningful. For my money, taking the Hades 2 formula and combining it with the immersive sim elements of, say, a Prey Moon Crash would be the ultimate evolution of this genre. But only time will tell if that happens, and in the meantime, Hades 2 is as good as it gets. It's not only a game that is beautiful, professional, fun, addictive, heartfelt, and thought-provoking, but it's a game that has soul. You can feel the love and passion that went into making this adventure, and if for nothing else besides this, you owe it to yourself to at least give it a try. It does stumble in the final legs of the story, and quite spectacularly so, ruining many of the plot points that came before, but that doesn't mean that for the vast majority of my time playing this game, I wasn't having a blast. I miss the characters, the bosses, the keepsakes and arcana cards, and even writing about it now has me wanting to revisit the world again. It's just such a bummer that that ending wasn't perfect, or this game could have been a masterpiece in many ways. Regardless though, if it wasn't already clear, Supergiant, the creators behind Hades and Hades 2, are some of the best in the business. And I can't wait to see what they do with their formula next, and I'm personally really hoping they take some of my ideas of combining their stuff with immersive sim elements and even deeper RPG systems. But as always, thank you guys so much for watching my now 3rd installment in the Before You Die series. I'm having a bunch of fun making these and want to hear from you guys down below what you want to see from this series and what kinds of things you want me to talk about in each video, since I'm sure things will change a lot as time goes on. Thanks again, and until next time.